Welcome, everyone, to Last Week This Morning, where Markham and I recap our stories from last week and we help you get prepared for what's to come this week. And I mean, I have a few things that are top of my mind. I know that this week's going to be a holiday week for many of us, as Canada Day is tomorrow. And for me, you know, our Canadian flag is 60 years old today. We've got a lot of nation building that we want to get on. It seems like there's a bit of a mood in Canada for that now. And, I'm ready to kind of see what's possible. And right off the gate, we've got this digital service tax announcement that Carney came out with. And I'm wondering, it sounds like he's giving up something, but to be honest, I'm not really clear what that is. So maybe you can help us understand it, Markham.
I'll do my very best, but before we get into that, I have to tell you that I am old enough to remember when the flag was introduced. I was in grade one, and we all had to line up, and it was a big deal. It was a really big
Yeah.
deal because the adoption of the flag had been kind of controversial. Not everybody liked it, and now we love it. It wasn't the case back in 1965. So, yes, actually have vivid memories of standing in the auditorium with the other kids as they unveiled the flag, and we didn't know exactly what it was about, but it was a big deal. We enjoyed it. So let's talk about the digital services tax. When I heard the announcement that the Canadian government had rescinded its implementation of it because Trump did, made a big deal of it and said that he would suspend the negotiations over the new trade deal. I was kind of annoyed because I saw that as the Canadian government capitulating to Trump, which has not been
Hmm.
its style so far. Prime Minister Mark Carney's done a very good job of holding his own and better. Then I read a little bit more and I realized that this is more strategic than a capitulation because Canada, up until 2023, had been, well, it still is part of this larger OECD, Organization of Economically Developed Countries, and
Hmm.
G20. And they're putting together the one pillar agreement. So there will be a digital tax, services tax, basically, but it'll include this broader group. And they were having trouble getting the agreement together, and it was going slower than anticipated. And Canada just got tired of it and said, "Nah." Last year they said, "Nah, we'll introduce our own tax, and when this other agreement comes into effect, we'll then stop our tax and we'll become part of this other larger group." So really, what did he give up? A year or
Yeah.
two until the larger group, the OECD agreement, comes into place, and in return, he got the trade talks restarted, which is far more important for Canada than that. So we can tuck our indignation back into our pocket. It actually, I think, was a good move.
Well, we all know that Trump likes to have his ego stroked, and maybe this was a way to give him something that wasn't really much of anything at all. So Cardi might know what he's doing on this one, and hopefully we can get back to the table.
Indeed. Now, the second thing before we get into our stories from last week, today the U.S. Energy Information Administration released its oil import data for April. So it's always 2 months behind. It comes out
Right,
at the end of the
right.
month. And the Canadian exports to the USA were down just marginally, about 250,000 barrels. So instead of around 4 million, it was 3.75 million. And the reason for that is that there were some refineries shut down for maintenance. And on top of that, there was stronger U.S. Oil production because 70% of the heavy refineries that can run heavy crude were built just for Canadian heavy crude. But that means 30% of them have some flexibility and maybe they bought some light sweet crude. The point here is that the market has essentially discounted Trump's, uh, bellowing about tariffs and tariffs on oil. Nobody thinks it's going to happen, and I think the data shows that it's pretty much status quo.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to know that there hasn't been interruptions. I think everyone's kind of biting their nails, waiting to see what's going to happen next, and worried about that, especially in Alberta. So,
Yes, and that's right. And I think, as it turns out, it'll be status quo going forward for Alberta. Whatever additional shipping capacity is added, like Trans Mountain expansion now is 80% full, and there's a chance to optimize it for another 200 or 300,000 barrels a day. There will be 500,000 barrels a day of new oil sands production coming on stream by 2030. So all of that could be handled by existing pipelines. And we'll get into this. This is one of the stories we're going to talk about that's coming up, but why there's a case against a new pipeline. We don't need it. And as far as I know, we're the only organization in Canada, media organization, making that argument. So anyway, we'll
Yeah.
get there. We'll after we
Yeah,
talk
we'll
about
get into
what happened.
that. Actually, I wanted to go back last week. The both of us talked about the energy grid, the Canadian energy grid, and you had another expert on the show, Marion Hill from the Norwegian firm NDV, and the message was pretty clear. We've got some work to do. Uh, we can be pretty proud that Canada is an emissions, very low emission, almost emissions free power grid, but it's aging, and that's a real problem. And so I was just wondering what you came out of that interview with, and if you got to have a conversation with Carney today, let's just say he calls you, what are you going to tell him? What are you going to say to him to about this issue?
Get on with the business of building a national power grid. And that's actually misleading because it likely will be three linked power grids. So it'll be BC
Right,
to Manitoba, that'll be the western grid. Then we'll have a central grid of Ontario and Quebec, and then maybe an Atlantic loop that includes Quebec as well. And we've had, a couple of weeks ago, we had Professor Madeline McPherson, who has modeled this for a long time and done the crunch the numbers. And she gave if you haven't seen it already, folks, go to our YouTube channel and find that video because she did an excellent job of explaining why this east-west trade in electricity is so important as we grow our grid to meet increasing power needs. So to get to what Marion said, the demand for electricity is skyrocketing around the world. BC, where I live, they're projecting 2% growth per year for the next 10, 15 years. In the US, we're seeing between 3 and 4%, depending on where you are.
right,
That's like astronomical because we had from 2008 to 2023, we basically had no demand increase. It was flat, and because there was a bunch of uh, big loads like paper mills and sawmills and that kind of stuff went
right.
bankrupt in the 2008 crash.
Mm-hmm.
So that load didn't get replaced, and an energy efficiency programs from the utilities. All of that is changing with electrification of transportation and building heating with heat pumps. And so
Right,
and then air conditioning, goodness gracious, with the heat waves that we're seeing in the US and around the world, the demand for heat pumps so that you have good heat and air conditioning in the during those heat waves is through the roof. So the problem then becomes, how do you do it? How do you adapt your grid? Can you get the equipment? There's all kinds of logistical issues here, and I talked to Marion about some of those. And yes, we're at this point we were kind of we had 84% low emission power. We've got stable
right,
grids. We very seldom get outages, and not for very long. And our prices are very low for electricity.
right.
While we shouldn't be complacent because given the demand growth, if we aren't on top of that, we're going to be in trouble. And remember that the reader who
Yeah,
contacted us or made a comment, I guess, and he said, "Where is all this electricity coming from?" And so I did a video about it, and I basically explained everywhere the grid operators are planning for increased demand, and they're adding generation, they're adding equipment, they're expanding their transmission, or they're re-engineering their transmission so they replace lines with lines that can hold 2 or 3 times as much electricity. There's all sorts of things that are going on behind the scenes to the backbone of the power grids. But that being said, getting it done is a whole different matter because you've got interconnection queues like in the US, where
yeah,
you've got wind and solar plants waiting to get connected, and it takes too long. You have equipment shortages, transformers, apparently. There's a big shortage. A lot of this comes out of China, so that's a problem.
Yep.
So, bottom line is across the world, power grids are being re-engineered to grow and to shift to more intermittent resources like wind and solar. And both regulators, governments, system operators, and utilities are on it, but they're successful to varying degrees.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I basically came away from that interview thinking, okay, we're good for now, but if we don't do something and do something soon, then it might not cut it tomorrow. So we
Yes,
might not
that's
be
right.
looking at we're not looking at future stability unless we make some corrections. And I think the other point with the viewer question is we've got political work to do. We've got to build some yeah, we've got to get people on track for what the problem is. I think there's a big misunderstanding or lack of information out there with Canadians that we have a problem. I mean, most people don't think about it. You plug in your hair dryer, you dry your hair, and you go to work. You don't think about where that power is coming from. And as lucky as we are, there aren't any power outages, so we've never had to deal with that type of instability before.
Well, it's coming, and we've said this at Energy Media for a number of years now. The power grid is essentially the backbone of the 21st century economy because we're
Right.
electrifying transportation, cars and trucks to begin with, but already we're seeing in China, they're electrifying their medium duty vehicles, their construction equipment. They're even in the long haul trucks, which would be considered heavy duty. They're beginning to electrify because they're so far advanced in their battery technology that they can now make batteries that are economic to put on a Class 8 long haul freight truck
Yeah.
and operate. So that's the future, and all of that takes an enormous amount of electricity. And so that we have to build that out, knowing that that is going to be our economic future.
And I know some farmers who are very excited about
Ah,
electric tractors too. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We also talked last week about the oil sands, and I think there's kind of this thought process that it's more of an all or nothing. It's either we're full in on the oil sands or we're not. And I think one of the things that came out last week for me was yes, those oil sands are resilient. The infrastructure is good, but there's a plateau ahead, and we need to figure out what that really looks like, and also potentially where are the pivots, what are our options, if break even points start going crazy, what do we do from here? So I mean, in one ways we've got this really great asset, but what's next? And I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
well, I interviewed Kevin Byrne, who's an energy economist with S&P Global, and I've been interviewing Kevin for 10 years. And much of what I know about the oil sands comes from Kevin. He's been very patient with me and sort of the mechanics of this because it's really complex, as he pointed out during the interview. But the takeaway from his interview is that the break even now, because they put out a new report a couple of weeks ago,
Right.
that's S&P Global, and the break even now is an average of $27 WTI per barrel, some as low as 20, some as high as into the 30s and maybe even into the 40s. Now, here at Energy Media, we have been working on different numbers. These are the latest ones, and our numbers that from Rystad Energy and Canadian Energy Regulator were higher. So now it's time to recalibrate using this new data. But the
Right.
problem, and I'm going to be raising this issue today, but we're going to keep coming back to it. Canada, the debate from out of the industry and the industry supporters is all about supply. It's all about the fact that, oh my God, we have 170 billion barrels of bitumen in the Alberta oil sands, and why wouldn't we ship that off to market and make lots of money off it? Well, because you're losing customers. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody talks about demand. They talk about supply, but they don't talk about demand. Or can uh, uh, bitumen compete in China and India? Maybe, maybe not. That's kind of an open question, and for a bunch of reasons that I've gone into in other videos. What about bitumen's dilbit actually is what it is, diluted bitumen.
Hmm.
But it's high greenhouse gas emission, its emissions intensity. It's very high, 66 kilograms CO2e per barrel on average. So there's lots of barrels that are higher than that. And you see in Europe, we're getting the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So there's going to be a carbon tax for imports into Europe. China is getting ready to extend its carbon market into, they started out in electricity. Very smart. They said 2021, we're going to learn how to do this. This is
Yeah.
complex. We got a big grid. We need to figure it out first. So that's what they did. And now they're ready to begin bringing in other sectors of the economy, and refining and petrochemical production is slated for in the 2027 to 2030 range. That's when it looks like they'll be. So right at the time that we're going to be trying to sell barrels into China, we'll be doing it with some of the most emissions intense oil on the planet into a carbon market, which is going to increase price. And all of that's an unknown, but why aren't we talking about
Hmm.
that?
Yeah.
These are the issues, the kind of issues that should be on the table. And as I'm going to say in today's, I pick apart an op-ed by Heather Exner-Poirot from Macdonald Laurier Institute. Always talking about supply, never talking about demand. No uh, business loan, a bank business or loans officer would allow a small business to get away with that, and we shouldn't allow giant industries like the oil sands to get away with it either.
Yeah, I think that you've hit on what I really want. What I'm thinking about this week is just as Canada Day approaches, I want to change the conversation in Canada, help people get informed, so we can start to have these informed conversations. Because right now, I feel like there's a real lack of facts, a real lack of facts. So I'm hoping that that's a little bit about what this show can do. I want to remind everyone to, like, subscribe, and please support us by purchasing a membership on our YouTube channel. And yeah, we're going to keep pumping out the stories this week. And if follow along, make a comment. If you have a question, please post it there, because I always pass those on to Markham, and when we can, we will respond with a video.
I want to talk just about a little about our latest hashtag. Show me the math. Show your
Yes.
math. If you want to expand the oil sands production, show me the math. If you want to build a pipeline, show me the math. Now, I've had people that I know who have said, well, why don't we just, change the regulatory system to encourage private capital, and then if there's a business case, private capital will build. Well, okay, assuming that there's no government money that will be required to de-risk a project, which I'm very skeptical about. I think there will be. I think we'd have to be really
Yes.
naive to think that after Trans Mountain Expansion's example, that that's not going to happen. But here's the thing. This is not just about business. This has a political dimension because uh, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says we want this pipeline to go to Prince Rupert on the northwest BC coast. BC Premier David Eby says no way. We're not supporting that. Absolutely. Absolutely not. So there's already setting up an Alberta BC political clash that Mark Carney's going to have to somehow navigate his way around and see if he can engineer a compromise. There's a social dimension. I mean, that pipeline is
Yes.
going to go through, just as TMX did, go through the traditional lands of First Nations and through or near communities who are saying, look, bear all the risk of an oil spill. We get none of the benefits. Why would we support this? This makes no sense. And so there's a political and social dimension to this, as well as the economic and business dimensions. And we're going to be exploring some of that in stories over the next month or two.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that we kind of bring a common sense back to the table here. And people love that term. Let's have a common sense conversation. Well, I don't think we can have a common sense conversation without doing the math. So
Yes. Yes. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, at the end of the day, this has to pencil out, right?
exactly.
And here we are in the midst of I mean, the IEA came out, the International Energy Agency, came out with oil 2025. So it's analysis forecast of oil demand and supply out to from now until 2030. Just came out with it either last week or the week before. And so I've gone through it. And what it says is peak oil demand now won't be in 2030. It'll be in 2029. And
Yeah,
supply is going to increase so much that by 2030 we'll have 9 million barrels a day of spare production capacity in the oil industry. And a lot of this has to do with China because China's oil demand is peaking like next year,
yeah,
maybe 2027 at the latest. And
yeah,
they're moving so fast and exporting so much of their electric technology into the global south that it's affecting forecasts on like a 6 to 12 month basis. It's crazy how fast this is
yeah,
taking place. And here in North America, we're insulated from that. We just pretend that China is still making cheap plastic crap, and that's what they do. So that's a really, really important thing, that report. And I'll be talking about it and diving deeper into it as time goes on.
Well, and I can do the math for folks on that one. That's only 3.5 years away from today. So
No.
we're talking like, that's going to fly by and probably be at our toes, before we know it. And I think that's really what the theme was from last week is we're not prepared. We're not prepared for this. It's happening. It's currently happening right now. And if Canada doesn't get some political uh, conversation going, some political movement, we're not going to be acting fast enough.
Canada, get your poop in a group.
That's right. And I think that's it for this week. Happy Canada Day to everyone. And
And everything.
we'll see you same time, same place next week.
See you next week.